Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Vollebrek, and welcome to our webinar on strategies to prevent disease, insect damage, and fruiting problems, where we're going to be sharing our key learnings and best practices. A little bit about myself before we get started. So my name is Richard Vollebrek. I am the president and CEO of Cravo. I've got a degree in economics, led the development of the retractable roof houses and coverings. Got a strong background in plant physiology and actually developed the computer control strategies for automating the retractable roof houses and led the R&D at our two research and development facilities in Mexico, and have visited personally most of the retractable roof installations globally. I'm going to now introduce my team here. So we have Yosun Cengiz, who's responsible for the Middle East, Shashank Jain, who's technical support for India, Middle East, Benjamin Martin, who is responsible for Canada, US, Caribbean. Carlos Ruiz Mapula is responsible for Latin America and Spain, and he's the one who has managed our demonstration houses in Mexico for 14 years. And we'll be calling on him for a lot of the answers to the questions that will come up at the end of the webinar. Bede Miller is responsible for Australia and New Zealand, Robert Ruhoff for Western Europe, and Rajendra Kumar for South Asia. A little bit of housekeeping here. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be taking questions at the end. And we will be doing some polls to help direct our comments to what's most important to you. So the learnings that I'm going to share today come from over 15 years of growing crops in both research and production retractable roof houses. And the learnings come from both successes and failures. Our R&D and demonstration facilities are located in Culiacan, Mexico, which is latitude 24, elevation 71 meters. And in Irapuato, Mexico, latitude 20, with an elevation of 1,700 meters. We had both retractable clear greenhouse coverings and retractable white cooling roofs to understand the difference between the two roof coverings on plant performance. And we've grown crops like peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, figs, and papaya. And the outline, we're going through the diseases, insect problems, fruit quality and quantity, the 4 climatic factors which impact plant health, fruit quality, disease, and insect pressure, the plant responses to changes in the different climatic factors, the limitations in managing these 4 climatic factors in the open field, in net houses, tunnels, and conventional greenhouses, how plants develop differently when they are exposed to the natural outdoors versus an indoor protected environment. Disease, how to break all 3 sides of the disease triangle. For insects, how to prevent the need to move to more severe forms of treatment. Problems with fruit quantity and quality. The limitations, what problems are difficult to solve using retractable roofs, and then questions. So here's a list of the typical diseases, insects, and fruit problems. And when you see how expansive this list is, it's not a surprise that growing is difficult and has many challenges. Okay, so we're going to address the key lessons learned affecting house design, operation, and production system protocols. The 4 climatic factors which impact plant development, disease, and insect pressure. First one, sunlight. So we have to think about sunlight is either it's too dark for the plants, it's optimal, or it's excessive. But the second one is light quality. And we're going to talk a lot about this shortly. Light quality, so is it direct sunlight or is it filtered sunlight? Free moisture, anything that can generate moisture to the plant. Could be rain, hail, fog, snow, dew, humidity in the air, or condensation. These are all different forms of moisture that have an impact on the plant. Air temperature, too cold, cool, optimal, or excessive. And wind, is it calm, breezy, or windy? To properly analyze how to prevent the problems, we need to understand how the 4 different climatic factors work together to influence which stresses the plants are experiencing. So how climate drives the plant processes. When we have the climate, the climate is affecting photosynthesis for how fast plants grow, but it also is driving our transpiration rate. And the transpiration rate is driving our water absorption, it's drawing our nutritional uptake and distribution, and it's also helping to draw oxygen down into the soil. So the climate is having a lot of impact on the plant processes. The transpiration is also causing water stress. And the water stress is affecting the plant size, the leaf structure, the balance between leaves, flowers, and shoots, the fruit size, the shape, the firmness, and the bricks. So it's really important to understand this link here between transpiration, the resulting water stress, and how that water stress is going to impact on the plant development. To manage the plant, you need to optimize the transpiration rate since it impacts on many plant problems. And typically, when you have a plant outside, you have a high transpiration rate. The moment it's under a cover of some form, you have a much slower transpiration rate. So if you're unable to prevent climatic problems, think of fire protection, then you must become an expert on fighting the symptoms. Think of firefighting using chemicals. So we're going to be focusing more on the strategies to prevent the problems by understanding how the climate is actually causing the problems or how the climate can be used to prevent the problems. It's complicated. Free moisture, sunlight, air temperature, and wind all interact to influence what the plants are experiencing. So sunlight is comprised of UV, visible, and infrared radiation. When we have low levels of UV, plants develop a thinner cuticle, which makes them more vulnerable to diseases and insects. And the colors of flowers and leaves are less brilliant. And the picture that's up here right now was done at Oregon State University, where they were actually comparing the changing in coloring from basil under a plastic roof compared to a retractable roof. And so when the plastic was filtering out too much UV, the basil did not develop the coloring, the purple coloring that was desirable. When you have optimal levels of UV, the UV has a sterilizing effect by potentially killing fungal spores. It starts or speeds up various plant responses, reduces stem length, contributes to a hardening of the plants, the thicker wax cuticle, and creates that intensive flower color, particularly the colors red and yellow. But if we have excessive levels of UV exposure, this can cause sunburn and bleaching of the leaves, flowers, and fruit. Now, infrared radiation heats up surfaces. And so when infrared radiation levels are low, the plant surface temperatures are cooler than the air, resulting in condensation forming on the surfaces. But when infrared radiation levels are optimal, the plants warm up faster than the air and dry off quickly. When infrared radiation levels are excessive, plant temperatures can exceed air temperatures and become excessive. And here in this picture, you can see the air temperature is 28 degrees and the fruit temperature is 42 degrees Celsius. Now, all light transmitting coverings block different percentages of UV, infrared, and visible radiation. And so it's really important to understand that plants are used to getting consistent levels of each of those wavelengths when they're exposed to direct sunlight. And when you have different coverings that are blocking different amounts of each wavelength, it's altering what the plant is experiencing, which is going to cause the plant to react to those changes. So when we're in the open field, the plants get 100% of the available UV, infrared, and visible radiation. The problem is we have rain, dew, fog, and high humidity, which causes an increase in free moisture on the plant and in the soil. We cannot prevent cold or excessive plant or soil temperatures, and there's no ability to regulate wind. When we go under a net house, the insect net blocks and filters a portion of the UV, the infrared, and visible radiation, but a portion of the sunlight is able to come through directly. So the plants are getting some sunlight, which has the full spectrum of the radiation. The problem under net houses is rain, dew, fog, and high humidity can enter inside, increasing free moisture on the plant and in the soil. And the impact of that is low transpiration and low water stress. And that happens particularly going into the fall when you get more dew, or through the winter when you have colder temperatures. The soil temperatures also tend to be cold during the short winter days. And the impact of that is the roots cannot supply sufficient water when the roots are too cold. And as the summer comes, radiation becomes excessive and humidity drops during the sunny days. And the impact of that is you get high fruit temperatures, high transpiration, and water stress. Now, when we're under a greenhouse with a clear roof, we are able to manage the rain, the dew, and the fog, but the humidity levels inside are typically higher than those outside. And the roof covering is now blocking and filtering all of the sunlight, so you're not getting the full spectrum of each of the wavelengths. And on sunny days, the air temperature will increase quickly, but the plant temperatures will increase slowly, which is causing a reduction in transpiration. And of course, we're blocking all of the wind, which is also causing a reduction in transpiration. So I'm going to give you some examples of how the 4 climatic factors work together to impact plants. So when we focus on plant temperature, not air temperature, the temperature of the plant is either increasing or decreasing. It's either insufficient, it's too cold, it's optimal, or it's excessive. And the plant temperature is either warmer or colder than the surrounding air. Air temperature does not equal plant temperature. So I'm going to show you a quick video that was taken in 2014 at our demonstration center in Mexico. And I'm going to show you the impact of direct sun and different coverings on the plant temperatures. And just so that for these international guests, we have over 700 people who have registered from around the world. Where our demonstration center is similar to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Indore, India, Muketsi, South Africa, Miami, Florida, and Bundaberg, Australia. And what I want you to think about is, what temperature do you measure when you're managing your plants? Are you measuring the air temperature, the leaf temperature, or the soil temperature?
It is February the 20th, and we're in Culiacan, Mexico, and we are in a retractable flat roof house. And what we're going to do is check the impact of the insect net on the sidewalls on the soil temperature and compare that to the soil temperature under the retractable roof and in direct sunlight. So it is now 12:30 in the afternoon, and when we look at the soil temperature here under the insect net, we can see that it's 56 or 57 degrees under the insect net. When we go under the direct sunlight here, we can see that the soil temperature is now hitting 60, 61 degrees. And now we're going to go under the retractable white plastic roof. And we can see that the soil temperature is 41 degrees. So when you look at the difference between insect net, when we were reaching temperatures of 57, the soil temperature was very similar under the insect net in comparison to the direct sunlight. But we were approximately 13 to 14 degrees cooler under the white plastic. And if we look at the leaf temperature, we can see that the leaf temperature is 29 to 30 degrees Celsius under the retractable roof. And when we go into the direct sunlight, we can see that the leaf temperature is approximately 34 degrees, which is going to cause the transpiration rate to rise dramatically, causing these plants to go under a water stress condition much earlier than these under the white plastic roof.
Now here's a summary of the temperatures we looked at. So soil temperature went from a low of 41 degrees under the cooling roof to a high of 60 degrees in direct sun. And the leaf temperature went from 30 up to 34 in direct sun. Now, what do you think the air temperature was when this was happening? Well, the first thing is, you'll notice we actually didn't even record the temperature of the air, because to us, the air temperature is not as important as the plant temperature. So it might have been 28 degrees, it might have been 30 degrees, it might have been 26 degree air temperature. But what was most important is to understand that the soil was going higher by 19 degrees just by letting the sun shine directly on the soil, and the leaf temperature went up by 4 degrees, which was going to drive the transpiration rate. So understanding the differences between air temperature, plant temperature, and soil temperature is critical to understanding what's happening to the plant and why it may be developing the way it is, and how that could be causing some of the problems that you may be experiencing in your conventional production systems. So for those of you that are growing in containers, you can see the chart on the right was again done by Oregon State University, where they were monitoring the pot temperature or the soil temperature outside in an open field. And the pot temperature went from 22 degrees Celsius up to 49 degrees Celsius in one day. And I've seen pot temperatures in excess of 60 Celsius. So think about having the roots change in temperature from 22 to 49 in one day. Because if the roots were in the ground, the soil temperature would not be changing even 1 degree. So once you're growing in a container, your soil temperature is going to change dramatically. And the root temperature is going to be impacted by the combination of the air temperature, the intensity of the sunlight, the size and the color of the container. So here you can see on the top picture, you have a black container and the bottom is a white one, and the temperature of the irrigation water. So the root temperature is what you need to focus on, but it's being impacted by 4 different factors. So if you're not measuring soil temperature, you don't know what's happening to the root system, which may be causing changes in the level of activity. Because roots will absorb water if water is available and if the root temperature is not too hot or too cold. And in the top right, you can see a picture that I took in Los Angeles, Chile, and the soil temperature in direct sun was 74 Celsius. So imagine what's happening to roots that are close to the surface if the soil temperature is 74 degrees. And that's telling you the power of the direct sunlight. That infrared radiation is going to change the temperature in ways that you don't imagine unless you start to measure it. Excessive soil temperatures kills roots, which will cause a reduction in the water absorption capacity and will create an entry point for soil-borne diseases. So the moment you're growing in a container and you cannot regulate the sunlight, you will start to have problems of fluctuating soil temperatures. They may be too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer. And once you create this condition that kills roots, all of a sudden the plant cannot absorb as much water as it used to, and it's going to go into a high water stress and it's going to stop growing. It will not be pumping enough water to support the rest of the plant. Now, when people use plastic on rain shelters, this is going to cause the plant temperatures to increase at the top, causing an increase in transpiration. And so the temperature just under the peak of the plastic is going to be warmer, but the fact that the plastic is there is going to keep the sun from reaching the soil, which is going to cause the soil temperature to stay cold. And if the soil temperature is cold and the roots are not pumping, and you've got plants who are transpiring at the top, the plant's going to go into a water stress because it's losing water, but it can't absorb water. And that's going to cause a high water stress and could result in fruit abortion. And we actually saw this just last year in Chile, where cherry trees lost 30% of their fruit 4 weeks after flowering, simply because the roots were not warm enough to support the transpiration caused by the plastic rain shelter. Now, leaves, flowers, and fruit surfaces are either wet or they're dry. And if you look here closely, you can see that the air temperature is 32 degrees. The leaf temperature is 25.8, and the relative humidity is 54%. And this is in a greenhouse, a polyhouse. And the air temperature, the leaf temperature, and the relative humidity and wind are working together to influence whether plants are losing water or transpiring at an insufficient, optimal, or excessive rate. When the plant is colder than the air, humidity will condense on the cooler plant surfaces, causing a lower transpiration rate and a higher risk of foliar disease. And so I want you to look really closely and think about what's happening, because if you walk into the greenhouse on a sunny day, it feels warm, but the plant is staying cold. And if the leaves are cold and the air is warm and you have humidity in the air, it's going to condense on the leaves. And once you have condensation on the leaves, now you've started to create the perfect conditions for foliar disease. Now, when the leaf is warmer than the surrounding air, the leaf quickly dries and the transpiration rate increases rapidly, but could eventually become excessive. So here in the direct sunlight on the left, we can see the leaf temperature of this raspberry plant approaching 43 degrees Celsius, which is a good indicator that the transpiration rate is going to become excessive. But on the picture on the right, you can see there's a water spot on the leaf, and the sunlight is coming through an opening in the vent. The leaf temperature is now 23 degrees, and that's going to cause the condensation to dry off quickly. If we have a low transpiration rate, it makes it difficult to move the nutrients through the entire plant, causing nutritional deficiencies. And if the leaves are transpiring extreme amounts of water, the water and the nutrients move to the leaves first, causing nutritional deficiencies in the plant. So the moment you're dealing in nutritional deficiencies, you have to start to think about, is the plant transpiring not enough water to move the nutrients, or is it transpiring too much water and causing the nutrients to move into the leaves as opposed to into the fruit? Unfortunately, there's no practical way to really measure transpiration. It's nice with our human body, we can check exactly what our blood pressure and pulse is, so we know how our blood's flowing through our bodies. But with plants, we tend to talk about the humidity inside, and we ignore the transpiration when we're diagnosing problems because we can't measure transpiration, so we tend not to think of it. But the humidity does not equal transpiration, because infrared radiation, wind, and the air temperature are all working together in combination with humidity to influence the amount of water that that plant is losing. So to demonstrate this, back in 2008, we did a trial at our demo house in Mexico, where we took the same tomato plant, young plant, and we put it in the open field under net and under a retractable cooling roof. All these plants were planted on the same date, same farm, same water supply. And the only difference is the plant on the left was in the retractable roof, the plant in the center was under net, and the plant under the right was in the open field. So the plant shape or structure is primarily controlled by water stress. So we can say the plant on the right transpired too much, which caused a high level of water stress, which caused the plant to develop dwarf characteristics. The plant in the middle under the insect net did not transpire high amounts of water, so it developed more vegetatively. There's more leaves, not as many trusses, and we can also see there's more foliar disease. And the plant on the left was in the retractable roof, where it had direct sunlight in the morning, and it was protected from that high radiation during the middle of the day. So it increased the transpiration rate in the morning, increased the water stress in the morning, and then reduced the transpiration and the water stress in the middle of the daytime. Water stress occurs mostly from plants transpiring too much water, since roots cannot absorb water as fast as leaves can lose water. And I've looked at many different crops, and I can say pretty much I have not come across a plant where roots can pump water faster than leaves can lose them. And so in order to regulate transpiration and water stress, you have to control how much water the plants are losing if you're growing outside, because if you don't regulate the amount of water, you're losing a lot of growth potential simply because the plant's going to suffer excessive water stress. And this size, quantity, and maturity of the fruit is highly influenced by water stress. And so these were clusters that came from the retractable roof on the left, the net house in the middle, and the open field on the right. So same genetics, same soil, same water quality, but by changing the transpiration rate, we were able to change the fruit development. So the number of fruit, the fruit size, the structure, the bricks, and firmness are all influenced by the level of water stress that the plant is experiencing. Same applies to capsicums, cherries, any fruit is going to be controlled heavily by water stress. And this also impacts on shelf life. So if you have low water stress with softer fruit, you're going to have a lower shelf life. If you have firmer fruit that had more optimum transpiration and water stress, you would have moved more calcium into the fruit. It would have been firmer, and hence the shelf life would have gone up. The number and size of stems are also influenced by the amount of light and the level of water stress. And again, here's blueberry plants grown under retractable roofs and tunnels. And you can see there's a real change in the structure of the plant. Low water stress occurs more often from plants transpiring too little water, but you can aggravate it by overwatering. And so the picture on the left, these flowers, the one on the yellow flower on the left was grown under a conventional stationary roof. The one on the right was under retractable. And you can see there's a change in the internode length. And that's all related back to transpiration and water stress. The plant on the right, the strawberry plant on the left came from a conventional tunnel. The one on the right came from the retractable roof. So you have the same age, same genetics, same farm, and the only difference was a retractable plastic versus stationary plastic, which altered the UV, the infrared, the wind, the relative humidity, and consequently the transpiration and the water stress. When fruit is ripening, rain covers prevent the sunlight from warming the leaves and fruit, which increases the humidity levels, which is causing a reduction in transpiration and water stress, resulting in soft fruit that has less bricks. And this is well known by cherry growers. They're putting up cherry covers or rain covers in order to protect the fruit from rain. The fruit size may increase, but the firmness and the shelf life went down and the sweetness went down. And so by permanently changing the climate, the plants responded to the change in the climate by having lower transpiration, lower water stress, which then changed the structure of the fruit. So regardless of whether you're growing in an unprotected or protected environment, light levels, light quality, air and plant temperatures, free moisture, in combination with the resulting transpiration and water stress, influences how plants develop. And so there's a lot going on, but if you understand what is causing the plant to behave the way it does, you can then focus on how to change the environment to change the response of the plant. So our ability, our yield and our quality is highly dependent on our ability to manipulate the transpiration and water stress that the plants experience. So, key learnings so far. Plants receive lower levels of UV, infrared, and PAR radiation when sunlight is filtered. Plant and soil temperatures increase faster in direct sunlight. Air temperatures increase faster under a greenhouse covering. Free moisture on plant surfaces is high in a greenhouse because the air temperature is higher than the plant temperature. Plants experience lower transpiration rates and lower levels of water stress in a protected environment. Root temperatures increase slower when under a covering. So now we're going to talk about strategies for how to use the retractable roof to naturally prevent the reproduction of disease, insect reproduction and damage, and fruiting problems. Before we do that, I'm just going to show you a quick video just of the different retractable roof models. And so you can see both a peaked roof and a flat roof here. The peaked roof has a gutter system. And so I'm not going to go into any discussions on the different structure models or coverings or things like that. Today's webinar is really focused on the plant and how to change the environment to manipulate the plant behavior. So here you see a combination of a net house with a retractable roof. So we're basically taking two technologies of a traditional net house where we have insect protection but no climate optimization, and then putting a retractable roof over top to optimize the climate. And then there's also multiple layers of retractable roofs that you can have to create even more sophisticated levels of environmental control. So how retractable roofs help prevent the reproduction of disease by breaking all three corners of the disease cycle triangle. So when you look at all the different types of fungal diseases, bacterial and soil-borne diseases, the level of infection is influenced by the combination of the pathogen, the environment, and the host. So when we look at the environment, conditions which impact foliar disease and survival and reproduction, we need free moisture on the leaves or flowers or fruit. Things like botrytis and mold require wet surfaces. We need cold nights and hot days for things like powdery and downy mildew, early and late blight. And we need reduced levels of UV since spores do not tolerate high levels of UV radiation. So the moment we take the roof covering away, the UV radiation sterilizes the plant surfaces and helps kill fungal spores. This happens automatically whenever the roof is retracted. When we look at the environment and the pathogen, we want to minimize the hours of free moisture on the plant to break the infection cycle. So the first strategy is to minimize dew accumulation. And to do that, you close the roof 95% at night to minimize dew formation on both the underside of the roof covering and on the plant itself. And so if you don't have a roof at all, you'll get lots of dew formation on the plant. If you close the roof 100%, you'll get dew formation on the underside of the roof, which will then drip onto the plant. But we found by having a 5% opening at night, it tends to minimize the dew accumulation both on the dew on the plant and on the roof covering. So if the first thing we did was minimize dew accumulation, the next thing we want to do is we want to dry off any free moisture on the plant. And so by retracting the roof as soon as the sun comes up and the temperatures are warm enough, that free moisture on the plant will evaporate quickly when the plants were exposed to direct sunlight, wind, and lower humidity levels. Now let's go to the host, the plant. The development of the plant's natural defenses is a critical step in breaking the one corner of the disease triangle. And in 2011, independent research done by Dr. Jorge Berni as part of his thesis for his doctorate, he confirmed that plants develop thicker leaves and a change in leaf structure in retractable roofs compared to stationary roofs. And what he did was he compared tomato plants under insect net and under a retractable roof. So comparing the thickness of the leaves, he measured them at 3 heights in micrometers. And you can see that the retractable roof, the upper leaves were 1100 micrometers, which is almost double the thickness of those under the insect net at 620. The middle leaves were almost the same, and the lower leaves were almost the same. So the critical thing here is that the upper leaves were thicker. Now, when he did a cross section of the leaf, the parenchyma length was again higher or thicker under the retractable roof at all 3 levels of the plant. So he went from 114 microns down to 81 under the insect net. And so what we're seeing is a change in the plant structure caused by changing the direct radiation, by changing the transpiration, and by changing the water stress. So if you have thicker leaves, fungal spores cannot easily penetrate thicker leaves with a thick cuticle. And so when people are in polyhouses and they have these outbreaks and they just cannot get rid of the outbreak, it's because of 2 reasons. Number one, the plant doesn't have that natural defense mechanism like it does in the field. And the second thing is the conditions inside the greenhouse of that high humidity with the cold leaf is causing humidity to keep on condensing on these leaves that are thin and consequently have great capacities to be a host for the diseases. The upper leaf surfaces are at greatest risk of excessive transpiration since they are farthest away from the roots. And we can see that on crops, on vine crops. If the plant is only 30 centimeters tall, it's a lot easier to manage when it's only 30 centimeters from the roots to the growing tip. But when you have a 3, 4, 5 meter long plant, to get from the roots all the way to the growing tip, the water has to move great distances. And so the condition of the growing tip is really critical in determining how resistant the plant is to changes in transpiration. Again, now looking at the environment, soil pathogens like nematodes, Fusarium, Phytophthora, Verticillium, they tend to thrive in soil that is too cold, too hot, too wet, and with a low oxygen content. So when the roof is retracted, it's causing a higher transpiration rate, which causes a higher water absorption by the roots, which causes oxygen to be drawn down into the soil, and which also increases the soil temperature. So by optimizing radiation and transpiration, we're changing what's happening in the root environment to help minimize the chance of these pathogens surviving and thriving. And at the end of the season, turning the soil over and retracting the roof will allow the sun to heat up and sterilize the soil to kill the pathogens, and the rain to clean the soil of salts and recharge the oxygen. And so when you think back to when we were looking at the soil temperatures in direct sunlight, soil temperature were hitting 60 degrees just by letting the sun shine on it, which is helping to clean up the soil. Now moving to insects. We've got insects that attack leaves, flowers, and fruit. And there are progressive steps to controlling insects, from prevention all the way to chemicals. So the steps to prevention, the first one is maximize the development of the plant's natural defenses. Second one, make the environment less hospitable to the insects. And the third one is reduce the access of the insects to the plants. So again, when we're focusing on the attractiveness of the plant to sucking insects tend not to reproduce on hard leaves since they are more difficult for nymphs to eat. And you'll probably notice in your own observations that insects tend to produce on weaker plants or sick plants and leave other plants alone. So when you're walking through a greenhouse or a field, the plant that's the sickest, all the insects have gone there to reproduce because those plants are a fantastic food source for babies. So leaves with thick wax cuticles are less desirable to sucking insects like whitefly, aphids, psyllids, red spider, white mite, broad mites, tuta absoluta, because young leaves are easier for young insects to eat. And so when people say that they're afraid of insects, my first comment is I'm more afraid of a weak plant. Because if you've got major insect problems on the leaves, the first thing is you probably have weak plants. And by focusing first on changing the plant's self-defense mechanisms, you will help prevent the reproduction. So again, that leaf thickness is an indicator of how much of a host that plant will be to the babies. Now, if we go back to this cross section of the leaf, I want you to take a look at the difference in the trichomes, which is the hairs on the upper and lower leaf surface. And when you compare the upper trichomes, you can see in the retractable roof, they're standing upright. And in the insect net, they're not. They're all curled over. And the same on the underside of the leaf. So this change in environment changed how the leaf developed, which changed the defense mechanisms of the plant towards insects. And so when you think about the growing tip, which is soft and succulent, and where the insects like to go first, if you don't have trichomes that are standing upright, helping to repel those insects away, you've created a plant that's naturally more attractive to an insect. So the thick upper leaves and trichomes help repel insects, especially at the young tender shoots. So by looking closely at the plant and seeing, has the plant developed these natural defenses, that will give you a good indication as to whether you're going to be able to prevent problems or whether you're going to have to react to the problems by treating the symptoms. So here, insects are present, but reproduction is reduced when self-defense mechanisms are fully functional. and plants are not experiencing excessive water stress. Because it appears that the virus transmission tends to occur when the insects feed from the plant and lay their eggs. And the picture on the left was taken back all the way in 2007 or 2008, again in Mexico. And this grower had been growing in a retractable roof for several years and never had problems with virus, even though there was virus problems outside. And Carlos and I, who manages the demonstration houses, we walked into this house and we looked at the whitefly and we're going, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Why aren't you spraying?" And he said, "Well, I got lazy because I haven't had major problems with virus." And when we looked at the plant, we could see lots of whitefly on the underside of the leaf. And Carlos, being an entomologist, got his little magnifying glass out and he looked very closely. And what he saw was, yes, there was lots of adults, but there was no eggs. And that was the first clue back in 2008 that something's happening different to the plant structure, which is causing a change in insect behavior. And so can we say that we can eliminate virus with a retractable roof? No, we cannot. I mean, we've had virus issues too. There are varieties that are more susceptible and less susceptible, and if you don't manage things perfectly, and if the climate's too aggressive, you still can get virus if you have that pest population of whitefly. However, we have seen that in general, we've seen less major catastrophic wipeouts from virus than what's experienced in conventional production systems. And we believe a lot of that has to do with the fact that if the plants are healthier and more resistant, while the insects may be present, if we can change their behavior where they're not reproducing so rapidly and not attacking the plant, they won't transmit the virus. And so we're not saying you will eliminate it, but we have seen you can reduce the risk by having plants that are less suitable as a host to babies. So when we get to insects like red spider mite, white mites, and broad mites, they thrive in hot, dry conditions when plants are under high water stress. And in our demonstration house, we did a trial where part of the house had a clear retractable roof and part of it had the white cooling roof. And there was insect net installed below those two different roof coverings. And this cucumber crop in here is the same variety down the whole length, but half the house had the white cooling roof, and that's the roof that's farthest away from us. And the plants that are showing greater problems with red spider were under the retractable clear roof. So we had the same irrigation system feeding down the length of the row, the same variety down the length of the row, the same insect net over top of the entire row, but half the roof had a cooling roof installed and the other half had a greenhouse roof installed. And the change in the radiation caused a change in the transpiration, which caused a change in the water stress, which caused a reduction in the pressure from red spider mites. So this is where we've done a lot of research to understand the chain of events. So we would try stuff, observe the results, and then try to work backward and see if we could explain why it happened. The next step is prevention. So physical prevention. So we want to reduce the entry of insects from the outside. And so this is a very significant difference when comparing a retractable roof to a tunnel. Because in the tunnel, they essentially have a fixed roof and an open wall. And in retractable, we have the option to make the roofs stationary. And so the top picture there, those roofs are 5 meters tall and they're sometimes 6 meters tall. And so if insects want to come in, they have to fly over 5 or 6 meters of walls. and most insects tend to fly 1 to 2 meters above the ground. So by having stationary walls, we're making it more difficult for the insects to come in. And we have definitely seen a reduction in insect pressure from having stationary walls. The next thing is you can do large houses. So this particular house is 216 meters from one wall to the next and 500 meters from the other wall to the far wall. And so there's 10 hectares under one roof and only 4 walls. And so the amount of crops exposed to the perimeter, to the outside, is very minimal in compared to having tunnels that are only, say, 30 or 60 meters long, because every time you create an opening in a tunnel, you create an entry point for an insect. So for the next level of physical protection is for high pressure of insects that attack flowers or transmit virus, install insect net under the retractable roof and on the perimeter walls and roll-ups. And so that again would be for thrip, whitefly, pepper weevil, fruit worm, pinworm, tuta absoluta, anything that you just cannot take a chance on. Then you put a layer of insect net across the entire roof. So you still get direct sunlight through the openings in the insect net. You don't build up the heat and the humidity like a poly roof. And you have the retractable roof over top to regulate the climate inside. So now let's take a quick look at the impact of having insect net below the cooling roof.
It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June the 6th, 2015, and we are in the Tribal Demonstration Greenhouse in Culiacan. And we're just going to look at the temperature and humidity differences between the retractable roof without the insect net and the retractable roof with the insect net. So currently, the outdoor black plate temperature is 39 degrees. We have 5 kilometer/hour winds. And when we look at the temperature and humidity, right here is the side without the insect net, and we can see the air temperature is 36 degrees and the relative humidity is 49%. And over here is where we have the insect net, and the air temperature is only 1 degree higher, but the relative humidity went from 49 to 70%. So what we're learning from this is during the high heat and humidity conditions, the insect net is helping to trap more of the humidity, and the plants are definitely performing better right now under the insect net because of the fact that the air temperature is similar, but the higher relative humidity is lowering the transpiration rate. Over here without the insect net, we're running into a much lower humidity, and so to compensate, it would be ideal to add a misting system so that we can boost the humidity and help lower the air temperatures.
So the next step on prevention is the firmer the fruit, the less susceptible to insect attack. In trials done in the UK, in a retractable roof in comparison to tunnels that were close by, the spotted wing Drosophila pressure dropped dramatically in the retractable roof houses, even though the roof and walls are frequently open. So they were not keeping the walls closed to keep the insects out. They were managing the roof and the walls to optimize the climate for the plants. But surprisingly, they had put traps out and they had essentially no spotted wing inside the house, but they had spotted wing in the tunnels that were only 20 meters away. And the tunnels that had strawberries and raspberries both had pressure from spotted wing, and in the retractable roof, there was none. So you go, how's that possible? Because the spotted wing can fly anywhere it wants. Well, the first thing is the climate in the retractable roof is cooler and less humid than inside a tunnel, so it's less desirable for insects because spotted wing like humid environments. But the bigger difference is the fruit is firmer in the retractable roof because the transpiration rate and the water stress is higher, and this change in fruit structure is making it more difficult for the adults to lay the eggs into and also for the nymphs to eat. And so the spotted wing basically are choosing which plant, which food is a better host for their babies, and they're not going into the retractable roof and they're going into the tunnels. From a cultural sanitation point of view, the speed of ripening can be increased or decreased to help prevent having overripe fruit. Because one of the problems is you get changes in the weather where all of a sudden you get a hot spell and the fruit ripens like crazy. And now you don't have enough pickers to pick on time, and now the fruit becomes overripe, and now you've got more of a food source for the spotted wing. And all of a sudden you can get an explosion. So the ability to regulate the speed of ripening not only helps your revenue because you can make sure that you're harvesting the fruit at its peak, but you're simultaneously reducing the potential of having explosion in spotted wing infestations. So from a cultural and sanitation point of view, what's very interesting is optimizing the climate for the plants simultaneously makes the climate less comfortable for the insects. Because insects like high temperatures, they like high humidity, they don't like a lot of wind, and they like minimal exposure to direct sunlight. Because you'll see on a hot sunny day, the pressures will start to increase. So the reproduction rate of insects is connected to the temperatures, and you'll see your population explosions happen when the temperatures start to spike. So from a biological point of view, plants have active self-defenses. So the best biological control is to make sure the plant has its natural defense mechanisms working. Make sure your population explosions are less likely to occur. There's a better balance of pests and beneficials because this is a more natural growing environment. So you tend not to see rapid populations of one insect over another. Biological sprays like soap, garlic, neem, citric oil, and cinnamon are very effective. And so there's less need to use chemicals, which is helping to preserve balanced populations, because most of you who have sprayed have found that the moment you go through and spray, you kill all the pests, but you also kill the beneficials. And the reproduction rates don't always happen at the same rate. And so you don't end up with the same balance. Beneficial insects tend to work very effectively in retractable roofs since you have a more natural balance of pests and beneficials. You have less potential for explosions, so you can population explosions, so you can work more with biological controls. And reducing chemical sprays helps maintain the balance of natural insects and beneficials. If chemicals are required, it may be possible to access chemicals registered for greenhouse use and those registered for open fields, since both environments can be created. So if I close the roof, I have a greenhouse. Your regulators frequently said you can use a greenhouse spray when it's an enclosed greenhouse. And if you retract the roof, you have an outdoor environment, so then you can use outdoor ones. And that, of course, has to be checked with your local regulatory official. But when you are spraying, by closing the roof part way, you can control the wind so you don't get the wind drift where all the spray is, the uniformity has disappeared. And if you retract the roof after spraying, that can help change your re-entry time. Now, when we go to fruiting problems, the three typical problems is we don't have enough flowers, they didn't pollinate properly, or we had physiological problems affecting the shape, the size, the firmness, the color, or the uniformity. So if we don't have enough flowers, it's typically due to the plant developing vegetatively as a result of experiencing either a low or really high level of water stress. So the plant on the right here didn't produce a lot of flowers because it was under too much stress. The plant in the middle didn't produce a lot of flowers because it was more vegetative. But for crops like blueberries and cherries, insufficient chill hours will also reduce the number of flowers. So when chill hours is critical, this was an example of what I did in Curicó, Chile 2 years ago. This is winter time. It was September, and so that's 2 months after the shortest day of the year. The air temperature was 23 degrees when I was there. But when I measured the tree temperature, it was 38 degrees Celsius. And so for crops that need chill hours to get more flowers, if you let the sun shine directly on the tree, when you have high radiation, it's going to cause the tree temperature to go up, which is going to cause a reduction in chill hours. But also, if you have a rain shelter up, it's also blocking the infrared radiation heat loss at night, which is also going to reduce chill hours. So for maximum chill, I want to lose all the heat at night, and I want to prevent the heat gain during the day. So when it comes to poor pollination, it's either going to give us a reduction in the fruit set, a reduction in the fruit weight, improper shapes, size, or a blossom and scar. Poor pollination is typically due to pollen being either too dry or too wet, excessive wind, rain, and temperatures either being too cold or too hot for bees to be active. So poor pollination is typically due to roof coverings blocking too much radiation, which bees use to navigate, or the temperature under the plastic being too hot for bees. And so when you're using a retractable roof at pollination time, the roof can be controlled to ensure that when outdoor conditions are too cold, too wet, or too windy, the roof is closed to keep the pollen dry and to maintain bee activity. And when the temperatures are optimal, the roof is retracted to create that ideal natural condition for flowers and bees. So when you think of what is the optimal temperature range for pollination, if you have those conditions outside, that's what you want to be happening outside. But if the temperatures are getting too hot and dry outside, then I can close the roof partway in order to keep the direct sunlight off the flowers so that they don't dry out so quick. And try to keep the temperatures in the optimal range for the bees to be active. And just keeping that opening in the roof is allowing full spectrum radiation to come inside to help the bees navigate. So when we look at fruit quality problems, we're going to look at the causes of reductions in fruit quality, but we're not going to deal with irrigation or nutrition because that's a whole different focus here. So here's a list of all the types of problems that you can experience when growing fruit. And across the top are the causes. And you'll notice nowhere does it say air temperature and nowhere does it say humidity. This is really focused on what is happening to the plant itself. So it's either the fruit's too cold, or the fruit's too hot, or the plant's transpiring too much or not enough, or the water stress is too low, or there's too much free moisture on the fruit, or we have strong winds causing mechanical abrasion. So this chart helps you to narrow down what is the root cause of each of these problems, and then you can create a strategy for how to change the climate to prevent the problem from happening in the first place. So problems related to the inability to optimize transpiration, changes in the fruit shape, or calcium shortages in the fruit. So if you're growing a cucumber and you see a curled fruit that's dried on the end, it basically said the leaves started to lose so much water that not enough water got to the end of the fruit, causing it to curl, which means you needed to change the transpiration rate in order to prevent it from running out of water and curling. If you're seeing problems like blossom end rot, which is caused by a shortage of calcium in the fruit, either your transpiration rate's too low and it couldn't move the calcium from the roots to the tip of the fruit, or the transpiration rate was too high and all the calcium went into the leaves and not into the fruit. When we look at problems of cracking, russeting, things like that, it's all connected here. So if we optimize the transpiration, we increase movement of calcium. If we optimize water stress, we're going to get a stronger cell structure and an increase in fruit firmness. So if I can make that plant lose a lot of water and then rest and then have the transpiration rate go down, I'm going to be stressing the fruit while it's growing, which is going to increase the cell wall structure, particularly because I'm getting more calcium into the fruit. So by optimizing transpiration and water stress together, it's going to reduce my nutritional deficiencies, reduce my chance of cracking or bruising or russeting, and it also reduces my risk from overwatering. Because irrigation, mistakes happen and all of a sudden someone waters too much and your tomato cracked. Well, if the plant was not exposed to optimal water stress while it was growing, it didn't develop that cell wall structure to resist cracking. And in our demonstration houses, we typically have them managed by engineers who just graduated 1 or 2 years experience. So they're relatively inexperienced compared to commercial growers. And so they made mistakes in the past. We've never really seen an issue of cracking, simply because when they're opening and closing the roof, they're changing the transpiration rate, changing the water stress, changing the fruit structure, which is now reducing the risk of cracking. So fruit abortion typically is a result of either high or low water stress. And so when we look at peppers in net houses going into the summer, you tend to see less flowers and then abortion of the pollinated fruit. And essentially what's happening is the plants are not transpiring enough, they're under a low water stress, so they're growing vegetatively and they start aborting fruit. And under crops like cherries, this relates back to the example of the rain shelter when I was in Chile last year. We were looking at a cherry crop where they had good fruit set, And 4 weeks later, the tree aborted 30% of the cherries. And we were able to determine that the root temperature stayed cold under the rain shelter. And so the plant started transpiring a lot, but the roots weren't warm enough. And so the plant went under a high water stress, and so it aborted 30% of the fruit. So the moment you see abortion after pollination, it typically is your water stress is too high or too low. And now we look at, is it a water supply problem caused by irrigation or caused by soil temperatures? Or was it a transpiration problem caused by being unable to optimize the rate that the plant lost water? So when we like to do some comparison trials, and 1 year we took, we had an independent testing agency test the Estefania peppers in the retractable roof compared to a net house. And they had a 13 to 20% thicker fruit, 40% firmer, and after 15 days, in the net house fruit dehydration was 30 to 35% higher. So that's all telling us that we had thicker fruit, longer shelf life, and firmer. But we also saw that the white cooling roof helped to improve the uniform coloring compared to the clear roof. And so when we did that, the test on the cucumbers that I showed you about, we did the same test with the peppers, and we saw that the peppers under the clear roof tended to have a more blotchy appearance because the clear roof was transmitting more heat, which was causing exposed surfaces to ripen faster, whereas the white cooling roof was blocking more of that infrared, keeping the fruit temperature cooler, which was now causing the fruit to color more uniformly. And so again, this is by really trying to understand what's happening. It was a fruit temperature problem. It was not an air temperature or humidity problem. So to increase nighttime chill and slow the transpiration rate in the morning, and this relates back to, again, maximizing the fruit quality during the heat. If I retract the roof 100% at night when the sun goes down, I'm going to maximize the nighttime heat loss through radiation to the sky. So I'm going to chill the plants. And if I want to increase the chill hours to try to get more flowers, I would be then closing the roof at sunrise to trap the nighttime cold. Now, these pictures are of a tomato crop. You would not do that with a tomato crop, but I'm just using it as an example of what you would do for a, say, a cherry crop or a blueberry crop where I'm trying to increase the number of chill hours. If I'm trying to extend the season into the heat, this strategy would work for a tomato if I'm trying to maintain firm fruit, firm, like a good quality going into the heat. Because if I retract the roof at night, that plant's going to get cold. And then by closing the roof at night, particularly if I have a cooling roof, it's going to keep the plant cold for more hours in the morning. And what that's going to do is it's going to stop the plant from transpiring in the morning, which means the plant has more capacity to handle a higher transpiration rate throughout the day. And it gives me a chance to get that fruit harvested before it becomes softer. And when the radiation starts to become excessive, the air temperature becomes excessive, and the transpiration rate is going to become excessive, by closing the roof 80 to 95% during the hot conditions, I'm going to reduce the amount of direct sunlight that's hitting the leaves, which will drop the leaf temperature, which in turn will reduce the transpiration rate, reduce the water stress, which will then help maintain the fruit firmness. Now, if you're growing in hot countries, one of the challenges as you get into the summer is how to maintain this balance between cooling and ventilation. So if I'm trying to keep the sun off the plants. I'm going to close the roof like the picture on the left in order to minimize the amount of direct sunlight coming in. But eventually the air temperature is going to start to build up. And so in your control system, if you set up a purge cycle where every, say, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, you retract the roof 15 to 20% for 2 to 3 minutes, what that's going to do is it's going to create a massive change of air. And it's going to get rid of that hotter air that's accumulated closer to the roof. And it's going to help cool the temperatures closer to the plant. And it will make it plant more resistant to the hot temperatures. So this is really beneficial if you're trying to extend your blueberry harvest, say 3 or 4 weeks, to maximize the yield or to stay in the market when the prices start to go back up. You're looking for every strategy to regulate the transpiration rate so the fruit doesn't go soft on you. And a misting system or fog system will definitely help reduce the air temperature and increase the humidity levels. And so if you're in a high humidity location, what we've seen is you want frequent short pulses, because I'm trying to get cooling without adding more humidity. So you may be on for, the misting system may be on for 5 seconds and off for 1 minute or 2 minutes. And if I'm in a low humidity location, then I'll tend to have a longer duration of, say, 10 or 15 seconds, because I'm actually trying to inject more humidity into the environment. For certain crops, you'll have to be careful that you don't wet the fruit. We haven't really seen issues on crops like tomatoes, but on crops like blueberries, if you get too much moisture on the fruit when it's close to harvest, it's going to affect the bloom, which will in turn reduce the quality. So the impact of excessive radiation, transpiration, and water stress on the quantity of fruit. This is a video I took in Mexico. And I want you to look really closely at the number of fruit on the plants close to the post where the opening in the plastic is, and the plants in the middle of the house. Because all these plants are the same genetics, same age, same water supply. But the change in sunlight is causing a change in the climate to the plants closest to the post.
We're in a conventional tunnel in Mexico, and I just want to show you the change in plant development under the opening by the gutter in comparison to under the painted white roof. So here we can see there's a very high fruit load. And good development of the laterals. So when we look down this side, we can see there is a significant fruit load. But the moment we go over here, we can see that the plant structure is completely changed due to the changing climate. Because here we're getting direct sunlight on the plants, so the leaf temperature will be higher, humidity will be lower, and there's increased wind right here. And this is causing a higher transpiration rate. And we can see that we're not developing the same number of laterals. So in order to properly cool and vent, they have to have a wide opening. But this is having a negative effect in the sense that there are 4 rows of crops in this house at 2.2 meters. The middle 2 rows have a very high fruit load, but the plants closer to the post line where the opening in the roof is have a significant reduction in fruit quantity.
So this is a fantastic example of demonstrating how if you were just managing by air temperature and humidity, you would say, well, the air temperature and humidity is pretty similar between the plants by the post and the plants not. But you'd have to start to think about how the direct sunlight is changing the transpiration, changing the water stress, and that's why we have a difference in plant development. So how to position rows of pots in a flat roof to minimize radiation midday. So here's two different examples of either 4 rows per 9.6 meter house or 4.5 rows per 9.6 meter. And of course, the hottest time of the day is 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and you want to minimize the amount of plants that are in the sun between 12 and 1. So if you're closing the roof, say 90%, and you have direct sunlight coming through that opening, you want to position your pots so that you don't have direct sun hitting those plants between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock. So in summary, the strategies to optimize the environment to prevent fruit quality or quantity problems, you want to basically optimize your free moisture, optimize the rain, protect against hail, snow, fog, dew, and optimize the humidity. Your sunlight, of course, too dark is not good. Optimal is best. Excessive sunlight creates negative effects. When we're looking at plant temperature, again, we just need to optimize that, and wind. So going back to nature and looking at these 4 factors and understanding sometimes rain is a positive. It brings oxygen to the soil. It cleans the salts. Sometimes humidity is good. If I have 40-degree temperatures, I want more humidity. But if I have 15-degree plant temperatures and 20-degree air temperatures, humidity is a major problem. So the plant management strategy is actually quite simple. If the plant temperature is too cold, we want to increase it. If the plant temperature is too hot, we want to reduce it. If the plants are not losing enough water, we want to make them lose more water by changing the environment. And if the plants are losing too much water, then we want to reduce the amount of water they are losing. What are some of the limitations of retractable roof houses? It's difficult to optimize the climate when outside temperatures are too cold. So if it's 10 degrees outside, you have less flexibility on how to operate the roof because you may need to keep the roof closed in order to protect the plants from the cold temperatures. It's difficult to cool down the nighttime temperatures without air conditioning. So if you're growing in a hot climate zone, Middle East, India, places like that, and you're trying to grow a tomato or a strawberry, for example, you need cool nighttime temperatures. And if you cannot find high elevations, if you don't reduce your nighttime temperature, you're going to have a limit on what you can produce through the summer. So you can extend a season with a retractable roof, but if your daytime temperatures and your nighttime temperatures are too high, you will be limited on fruit quantity and fruit quality. Horizontal airflow fans will be beneficial in hot, humid climates, especially if insect net is installed under the retractable roof, because what we found is the insect net, while it's good for keeping insects away, it tends to eliminate that large movement of air that happens in nature. And so horizontal airflow fans can be beneficial. And while retractable roof houses can reduce the need for chemicals, extreme conditions may necessitate the need for chemicals. So this is not something that's going to cure all the problems, but it helps either prevent the need to move up to more aggressive measures, or at least it reduces the frequency of time that you need to go to more extensive measures. Final comments. Air temperature does not equal plant temperature. And so one of the questions in the poll was, who measures air temperature, who measures plant temperature, and who measures soil temperature? If you don't measure leaf temperature and soil temperature, and you're only measuring air temperature, you have no idea what's happening to the plant and why it's going to do what it's doing. The next comment is, humidity does not equal transpiration. And one of the poll questions was, who measures humidity, who measures transpiration, and who measures water stress? Unfortunately, there is no practical way to measure transpiration, but just because you can't measure it doesn't mean that it's not the most critical function to the plant. Just like our blood pressure and pulse is critical to our bodies. So humidity is an indicator of transpiration, but it does not equal transpiration. Transpiration has a greater overall impact on plant development than irrigation. And what I found in all the years that I've been doing this in my travels around the world, people are experts on managing how much water they give the plant, but they tend not to focus on managing how much water the plant is losing. And so many of your fruiting problems relate back to low transpiration rates. So don't focus so much on irrigation, focus more on how to optimize transpiration. Your job is not to manage the climate, it's to manage the plant. You can hit your target air temperature and humidity levels and still have a terrible looking plant with bad quality. So try not to focus on the climate, look at the plant closer. And once you look at the plant closer and you start to understand what's happening, then you can work backwards and say, okay, why did the plant react like this? And how are we going to prevent it from doing that again? Focus more on the plant and less on air temperature and humidity. So I think we're going to bypass the poll because it didn't work the last time. But the question was, how likely are you to recommend this webinar to someone else? How was the length of the webinar? And what would you like to see more detailed webinars cover? So we're starting to build up and communicate our knowledge in a different form. Webinars have seemed to be the way to do it given the lack of travel. And so we're trying to figure out how to communicate what we've learned over all these years from all the different crops, from our clients around the world, but also from our own research and development facilities. And to get more information targeted to your interests, just go to the website, www.cravo.com, and you'll see we've got quite an extensive list of videos and documents to help communicate more about how to manage crops better. So with that, I'm going to stop the sharing, and let's see what if there's particular questions that have come up that we have time to answer.
Okay, can you hear me, Richard?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, great. So we had a lot of great questions, and I want to thank all the participants for offering them to us. A lot of them were somewhat connected, and I guess one of the first questions, if I grouped, would be that we've had questions about what is the ideal plant temperature, what is the ideal humidity, and where I really see that coming is they're really looking at climate, and the question I suppose that they're posing is, how do we know how to, for our specific crops, use the automated system or control strategies to manage the climate to impact ideal humidity, temperature, and so on?
Okay, let's start out with first, you have to look at the plant. because you have to first make a judgment on how is the plant performing and what is the root cause. So when I showed the example of the 3 tomato plants or of the blueberry crops in full sun versus under the plastic, you could see there was a change in the plant structure and the plant development. And you have to decide if the plant is transpiring too much or not enough. And so when Carlos and I were doing a lot of the trials on the blueberries, for example, we would look at the plant structure and we would say, okay, this plant needs to transpire more because we want to change the structure. So we're going to increase the leaf temperature, the maximum leaf temperature that we want to hit. And so in the case of blueberries, when the plant is in the fruiting stage, we may want a maximum leaf temperature of 31 degrees, but earlier in the vegetative stage, we may say the maximum leaf temperature is 28 degrees because we're trying to reduce the transpiration rate. So we're not really focusing on we're not looking at air temperature, that's number one. We are looking at plant temperature, and we are trying to decide if we need to increase transpiration or reduce transpiration. If I want higher transpiration, then I want a higher leaf temperature. So I will let more sun hit that plant in order to suck more water out of the plant. And if I want to make the plant transpire less, I will make the plant transpire less. So it all starts from looking at the plant and deciding how do you want to change the structure, what problem do you want to solve. Then you're going to change your target leaf temperature, and then you can go back to the control system and say, okay, I'm going to close the roof when the black plate temperature outside hits this level, because that's giving me the right leaf temperature. The second part to that is if I have a temperature of 30 degrees, 35 or 40 degrees air temperature, I will want a higher target humidity level inside in order to regulate the humidity. So let's say, for example, outside is 30 degrees air temperature, the roof is closed 95%, and the inside air temperature could be 30, 35, or 40 degrees. As the inside air temperature goes up, we need to be increasing the humidity in order to reduce the transpiration rate. So as soon as the hot conditions come, the greatest negative to the plant is if it runs out of water. I don't want it to run out of water. So as the air temperature goes higher, I don't want the humidity to be low. So I may have a target humidity of 50% at 30 degrees, have 65% humidity at 35 degrees, and 70% humidity at 40 degrees. Because in all three scenarios, what I'm trying to do is regulate the amount of water the plant is losing. Because we have seen that the plant can handle high air temperatures inside, provided it does not run out of water. And the best way to do that is to increase the humidity level as the inside air temperature goes up.
Understanding the impact of the climate on the plant responses, can you just, to finish up a bit more on climate, can you give a brief overview on the Cravo automation aspect of things? We work with computer systems. Can you just do a brief overview of how we approach and monitor the climate and the retractable roof curtains and walls?
Okay, I'm going to keep this real brief because I want to stay more focused on the plant problems, but essentially what we're doing is we're managing outside, we're measuring what's happening outside using a black plate temperature sensor. If the black plate is telling us it's too cold outside, we're closing the roof. If the black plate is too hot outside, we're closing the roof. And it's not, if the temperature outside is optimal, then we don't want the roof closed because we know we're going to get full spectrum radiation, or we're going to get normal transpiration rates that we would have in nature. And as long as my levels of sunlight and transpiration are in balance, I won't have major problems. But the moment I give the plant high sunlight for photosynthesis with low transpiration, that low transpiration rate is going to prevent the plant from absorbing all the nutrients in the roots and moving them fast enough to the extremities of the plant.
Very good. I suppose another one, we have quite a few questions that are very crop specific or region specific, whether it's physiological, so flower development, flower drop, more specific to a pest like Tuta absoluta and so on. Some of these are more grower consultancy focused, but how does Cravo work with our clients to leverage the knowledge that we have collectively in the different regions?
I think the first thing is you've got multiple crops, multiple growing regions, climate zones, and you cannot have one recipe that works everywhere. What you can say is there's general root causes of the problems. And so when you have a specific problem, the hardest thing is to try to understand is, do you know what the root cause is, or are you seeing the symptom? So if I take the example of blossom end rot, you can see blossom end rot. That's the symptom of a transpiration problem, but you cannot see transpiration. So all the focus tends to be on the supply of calcium. It doesn't go back to looking at how to regulate the transpiration rate. So I think in terms of how to most effectively help solve these problems, what we found works really well is we create WhatsApp grower support groups for customers. So when they have a problem, they can post the problem, and then our grower team can help identify the root cause and create strategies, because we would look at the environmental computer to say, okay, well, let's look at what is the radiation, what's the humidity, what's the wind, what's your set points, because it may be something that you're not controlling properly. And so that's where the consultancy side goes a little more deep. So the critical thing here is our first focus is to go back to what is the root cause of the problem, not what are the symptoms of the problems.
Very good.
Okay, go ahead.
Another one, which again is a little bit is common with a few questions, and I think it's relative to our audience, which are in warm or tropical locations where they have severe weather events, whether it's hail or heavy rains or high humidity or high winds. And so we had some comments there about storm damage. Some of our participants have had some issues where they've lost structures and so on. And so their questions, I think, are more on the product related aspect and design loads for our buildings. Can you quickly address some of that?
I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I mean, if they're interested on more on the structural design, I would say they should reach out to Cravo directly to get answers, or go to the website. Our structures have survived 16 hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons and hailstorms. So that's easy. I want to keep the focus on the plant side, because the topic of this webinar is disease, insect pressure, and fruiting problems. So I really don't want to, take people's time away from why they've joined here.
Very good. The last one before I turn it over to Yosun for some of the questions he's selected is that we have questions as the presentation was going along, which were addressed after or previous to the question in your webinar. How do participants, will this be available for them to review at their leisure after this ends?
Yep. So this whole webinar will be recorded, and it will be, everyone who's registered will receive a follow-up email with a link so they can watch it at their leisure. And we will also upload it to YouTube later on so that people can watch it later on.
Very good. Thank you. Yosun, do you have some questions to share?
Yes, couple of them. First of all, thanks everybody for dropping these good questions. And most of them were already addressed by Benjamin because he grouped the questions. But I also picked some of the questions about the general climate and plant management. Actually, one of the participants is asking how to manage the crops, because this seemed to be not really well addressed. And he is asking, when we start controlling the climate, the plants will automatically adjust themselves with the climate. So what do you mean by managing the crops, managing the plants?
So the first comment is, he's absolutely correct. The plant will develop according to the climate that it's been exposed to. So it's kind of like if I don't do any exercise, my body will start to change based on me not exercising. And if I start to exercise, my body will start to change based on doing exercise. And so the question is, what do we want? How do we want that plant to develop? Are we happy with how it's developing? And so my starting point always is, are you really happy with how the plant's developing? And if the answer is you're happy, then you don't have any problems. And if you have problems, then we got to go back to why. So why do you have botrytis problems, or why do you have problems with a certain insect, or what problem are you trying to fix? And so when you look at what I try to do is have a picture in my mind, or an actual picture of the perfect plant. And if I know what I want that plant to look like, does it actually look like that? And if it doesn't look the way I want, then I have to figure out how to change the climate to change the development of the plant. So if my inner nodes are too long, if I'm growing lettuce and I've got big leaves that are thin and it's not crunchy, if I've got blueberries that are small and they're soft. So what is the primary problem that I'm facing, that I'm trying to solve? And so when you go back through this webinar, you will see that all of the problems trace back to environmental causes first. Soil temperature is too cold, soil temperature is too hot. Plants are losing too much water, they're not losing enough water. They're not getting enough UV or infrared to develop the proper leaf structure. And if I don't have the proper leaf structure, I now have more problems with foliar disease or insects. So, I saw one of the questions was, for example, can you use VPD to manage this? And I go, absolutely not. VPD does not factor in infrared radiation. So if I have a closed roof and no direct sunlight, I will have a theoretical VPD number. And if I retract the roof and let the sunlight shine directly on the plant, the VPD number didn't change. And so you cannot use VPD to actually tell you what the actual transpiration rate is. So start by looking at the plant first and figure out what problem you have to solve. So when you look at soil diseases, you always have to go back to what conditions is allowing the particular problem to thrive. Do I have high salt content? Do I have cold root temperatures? Do I have hot root temperatures? How am I going to change this? So is there other specific questions?
One of the participants asking, what is the ideal leaf temperature? Can we address that? Or
Carlos, you want to join in or say something, but you're on mute.
Yes, hello. It's a good question. What is the optimal leaf temperature? According to the physiology of the plant in general, the optimal leaf temperature is between 15 degree and 31 degree to prevent the over 31 degree, the closed stomata, because it's too much transpiration rate causing by the high leaf temperature. And when you plant, you running below 15 degree, go into the dormancy for low temperatures, and the plant reduce the metabolisms below 15 degree. When you management these rate of leaf temperatures, like optimal, the plants is more active, more in good transpiration rates, and this kind of the condition, physical condition for the plant is can prevent many of the problems we have about insects and diseases, and even structure of the plant and development of the plant, and also the different things interacting in the plant management. For me, the more important things to manage plant is the management the leaf temperature and humidity. That is the two very important tools, and when you can prevent the plant running off of those good rates, leaf temperature, humidity, the plants can grow better along the life cycle.
So really what we're saying then is between 20 and 28 would be optimal, right? In that 20 to 28 is your optimal range. At
Yes.
15 degrees, it's going to grow slower. It's going to go dormant.
Yes.
And above 31 degrees, your transpiration rate is going to get too high. And so this is one of the interesting things when you look at people in hot climates, they're either in a more desert climate or a more tropical climate. And when we start to think about transpiration, if I have 35 degrees with 20% humidity, or I have 35 degrees with 80% humidity, the air temperature is exactly the same. But the transpiration rate is going to be dramatically different if I have 20% humidity or I have 80% humidity. And so if we're trying to manage transpiration, what you would see is that your maximum leaf temperature would be lower when you have 20% humidity, because I need to reduce the amount of direct sunlight because the transpiration rate is going to be high because I only have 20% humidity. But if I had 80% humidity, the plant physically cannot lose as much water through transpiration. So I'm going to let the leaf temperature go higher in order to suck more water out of the plant, because I need to make it lose that water in order to move the nutrients through the plant. That's a great question.
Agreed. Yes.
Justin, you got another couple questions?
I've got a couple, Richard.
Pardon? Yeah, go ahead.
Beat, do you have any question?
Yeah, got an interesting one here. If a client was to cool their water, the irrigation water, to keep the root zone quite cool, but had high air temperatures, what would the impact be to the plant?
So you're cooling the water.
Mm-hmm.
So the
So you've
roots
got
are
cold root temperatures, but high air temperatures.
Are we talking specifically like on a lettuce crop, or?
Let's say strawberries.
You're cooling, I mean, I don't know, cooling the water isn't going to do much in a strawberry, I don't think, because the bag itself is going to be exposed to the sun and the high air temperatures. I don't see how the cooling the water is going to do a lot on a strawberry. I can see it under a floating raft system for lettuce. Unless you got a different.
Would you see any issues if you had cold root temperatures? It's kind of like, I suppose, the cherry scenario where you had an inactive, underactive root system, but a very high transpiration rate from a leaf point of view.
Well, in that situation, I think what you're describing is not optimal root temperature. You're saying the roots are too cold.
Yes.
So if you're chilling the roots too much, then they're not going to be able to absorb the water fast enough, and you would go into a high water stress situation.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had warm water, you would have low dissolved oxygen content, which is now causing a different problem. So when we're talking irrigation water, again, it could be too cold, it can be optimal, or it's too hot, and there's different consequences to each of those. So I guess I'm trying to understand the question, because you would be chilling the water enough to get in the optimal range, not too cold. Unless you're trying to chill the roots to fool the plant into making it think it's winter or something like that. That's a whole different animal than just making sure that the roots are cool enough to be functioning properly.
I've probably got a more specific question towards Carlos. What have you found best to prevent and control nematodes?
Nematodes is very difficult to manage. Can manage with only one thing or one tool. You can use the different kind of management to prevent the infection of nematodes. Nematodes problem come because you use the same soil for a long time and using the same kind of crops. And the other thing is that when you grow under the greenhouses or protection or closing system, the soil will be more close and less oxygen contents, and the disease like nematodes like life with no oxygen contents. And when using the retractable roof production system, after the crop cycle, when you clean the house of plants, you can open the roof, let the sun radiation go directly on the soil, plus the sun rain. Remember the rain, the water is H2O, it's like oxygen. The water could have oxygen, and when you let the water go into the soil, you add oxygen, and the nematode doesn't like life and oxygen and can live with oxygen contents. But you can do after different tools, like for example, growing after crop season, kind of sorghum to use like blending the soil and this green materials of sorghum can do the like fumigation or kill the nematodes, because when the soil interacting with the green mass or green material, the sorghum, making the gas to can kill the nematodes. And the different process, you can use added mycorrhizas after planting to increase the microorganisms in the soil to can help the root system to prevent the kind of disease. And after that, you can add some products, organic products contain oxygenous in the formula every week or every 15 days to prevent the balance between the good microorganisms and the bad ones like the nematodes. Because for naturally, the good microorganisms live in the oxygen present, need the oxygen to live, and the bad ones, like nematodes, doesn't like oxygen, and you can kill the nematode with the added oxygen every 10 days or every 15 days. And the other thing the other tool you can use is Actually, in the world, you can find different kinds of nematicides from extractus plant like cinnamon or other kind of plant to follow the triangle of the crops, integral crop management. We need to let the chemical option like the lab option to use, because normally the conventional plant manager or crop manager, we reacting like the fighting, you know, when you have the problem making the economical losing, and you use the chemical to stop, but you stop the problem right away, but don't go to fix the original problem in the past, no? And when you use that reaction, you lose money because the economical losing in the crop is no can reverting, can go back, and you spend more money using the chemical to stop the problem. And this kind of nematodes, the biological cycle of the nematode is 14 days between egg and adults. And you can have the reinfection cycle every 14 days. And then you have to test in the soil every 14 days after put the plant in the soil. And even the previous testing of the soil, you know exactly how much nematodes have and what kind of nematode you have in the soil. And then you can start making the integral program to reduce the risks to get losses of this kind of the infection. But for sure, our system is very adapting in that process of the management integrate. And because you can open the roofs, let the sun dry the soil, you can kill the nematodes. When you explore, you put the soil directly in the sun predation, can kill the nematodes, and using the different things I explained, for sure you can go and end the season with no problem with nematodes.
We have a question asking, can you give us an approximate estimation of reductions of chemical usage and water in a retractable roof?
Yes, normally we testing that one depend. For example, in tomato crops in Culiacan area, we measure how much water we use in irrigation, and we testing the same variety, the same planting date, but different system like net houses and grow houses, and the peak time of the production with the high temperature, like for example April or March, end of March, we use 40% less water than the net houses, because our plants is in the peak of the transpiration or rates of plant and soil. We put the shadow like my picture in the back, and we reduce the speeds of the transpiration of the soil and the plants taking less water than one plant are in the high transpiration rate and high soil temperatures and soil transpiration or evaporation, sorry. And when you use the shadow in the peak hours, you can reduce the amount of water the plant take it, and losing the water from the evaporation from the soil. And for example, we are very deeper in that one because, you know, some places like Middle East, the water issue is very important because it's the issue of the water, no? And when you plant is more balance between high transpiration and low transpiration, the the metabolics to get water and move the nutrients is more efficiently because only because you can manage the leaf temperature and the humidity. What is the other question about the
reduction in chemicals?
Yes, okay, sorry. For the reduction in chemicals and farms and commercial farm like 50 hectare and blueberries, the owner of the farm or the manager of the farm say they reduce 40%, more than 40% in chemicals between tunnels production and Grable. And in our demonstration house, we can grow the crop, the entire crop on entire season, only using the organic products to prevent the foliar insect or foliar diseases. And but it's the plants with good health can defend better the plant with no good health, like the big leaf, big stems, and skinny leaf, because those kinds of plants is love for insect, no, and disease. And we have we have the capacity to break the disease triangle, because you open the roof in the morning and dry out the plants, out leaf, and it's very easy to prevent the disease problem as well. That's why you use less chemicals than the other system.
Perfect. Thanks, Carlos. Just scrolling through some of the questions real quick. One of the ones here from Kenya. How can we control tuta and tomato and also the cold season, the night temperatures that are 12 to 13? The critical part here is the night temperatures of 12 to 13 are not an issue, providing you can get the plant to warm up in the daytime. So if you have high radiation, so if you're at high elevation and you have high radiation, the critical part, if you're under poly, your soil temperature is going to get too cold under poly during the cold nighttime, and your production will be limited by your cold nighttime temperatures. And in the tuta, it goes back to the strategies that we talked about. First one is maximizing plant health, and then minimizing the reproductive cycle. And if you cannot manage it just with that, then you can also add insect net. Another question, just looking at, are these retractable roofs effective in lands under cultivation with a history of disease and insect infestations? I mean, what this really comes down to, do you have good soil or bad soil? And if you have bad soil, retractable roofs don't fix bad soil. You can reduce some of the negatives of bad soil by optimizing the transpiration and oxygen like we discussed. But if you have bad soil, you may need to look at a hydroponic system to prevent the soil problems from taking control here. Another one, what should be the night optimum leaf temperature for the strawberries to get maximum sugars? Here's the way I look at it. I always go back to nature. Which month gives you the best fruit if you're growing outside? And if you're in the UK, for example, and the best fruit comes in June, you want June conditions for as many months as you can. And to simulate that, you're going to be operating the roof to create those conditions. So you may be choosing to leave the roof retracted at night, every night through the summer, to keep the plants as cool as possible by allowing it to lose the heat, and then closing the roof at just before sunrise in order to minimize dew accumulation, so that you're helping to reduce your chance of foliar disease. So every plant has a sweet spot in terms of temperatures and transpiration, and it's a matter of understanding when does the plant performance when is it normally the best, which month is it the best, and then try to determine the strategy to create that climate for as many months as you can, using the natural outdoors and using a protective environment. Now, going back to limitations, I mean, in the trials that we've done in Culiacan, Mexico, we came to the conclusion we cannot grow a good strawberry in Culiacan. It's just that we don't get enough nighttime chill. We're at latitude 24, basically at sea level, and it just doesn't work. Even with a retractable cooling roof, even with misting, we've tried it in the soil, we've tried it hydroponically, and it just doesn't work. So there's limitations, and that's one of the reasons why we have those demonstration centers, is that we want to try stuff, see what works, see what's easy, see what's possible, but also see what's impossible. And that was a great example where we go, after a couple of years of trying, we just go, nah, can't do it. You need to be at a higher elevation with a cooler nighttime temperature. And then that's what we've seen at our other research center at 1,700 meters. We get better results under the same cooling roof just because we have cooler nighttime temperatures. Other questions that you guys have picked out there?
Yeah, there is a question from Mamta Reddy that if we have in the Indian coastal areas, we have a continuous rainfall for 2 days or 1 day, how to maintain the ventilation in the retractable roof. Then the next question she has that if the temperature, air temperature is 40 degree and water temperature is irrigation water temperature in the NFT system is 20 degree. So she is saying that will the plant nutrient absorption is good or health will be good? So that's the two questions she is asking.
Okay, so let's go back to the monsoon conditions. So when you have rain, obviously the roof has to be closed. And so there are models of retractable roof houses that will allow for ventilation when it's raining. So the roof would be closed to keep the plants dry, but you're now in a polyhouse environment essentially. So you're gonna have higher humidity and no wind, so your transpiration rate is gonna be low. So the critical part is, if it rains for every day, but it's only for 3 hours a day, and the roof is closed for only 3 hours a day, the moment you can get that roof open when the rain stops, you've now normalized the transpiration rate. If you had 3 days of continuous rain, that's the toughest one because you have to leave the roof closed. You're in a polyhouse environment for 3 days. But the moment it stops raining, even for an hour, getting that roof open even for an hour to get the wind to come in and start drying off those leaves and sucking some water out are going to help the plant recover from being stuck in a low transpiration environment for an extended period of time. And so when you're thinking about rain events, the critical part is what is the duration of the rainfall? If it's a couple hours, doesn't matter. I mean, that's like saying it's a cloudy day, part of the day, and then it's sunny. The plants can handle that, no problem. 3 days of rain creates a different climate than 3 hours of rain. And so when you know you're going into a low transpiration environment, you're going to want to have the ability to open that roof as fast as you can, even if it's still cloudy, just to get the wind moving, dry off the leaves, and start getting the transpiration rate back up. And in that situation, it also helps to have open sidewalls. So if you can roll up the sidewalls and let the wind come through, that will also help to regulate the climate inside so that you get the transpiration rate as high as you can. What was the other question?
Yeah, there is Muhammad Tasin is speaking. He's asked a question from Pakistan that we face one of the serious problem of lava drop in chili pepper during the hot sunny summer days.
Yep.
So what would be the reason how we can prevent that?
Okay, so this is, if you have flower drop, it's either going to be low water stress or high water stress. So if you have a condition where it went to 40 degrees and 20% humidity, the transpiration rate is going to be super high all of a sudden. The water stress is going to be super high and the plant's going to abort. So it's important to understand if we're dealing in high heat with super high humidity or high heat with super low humidity. And so when we look at the trials in Mexico where they're growing in net houses and it comes to May, April, May, you can see that the peppers in conventional net houses, they suffer from fruit abortion and soft fruit. And that basically is a vegetative response. And that's caused by the plant not transpiring enough. So when you're in April, May conditions, you're almost at the longest day of the year. So you have lots of sunlight. And you have lots of radiation coming into that house, which is driving the transpiration rate up. But the insect net's trapping all that water that's being lost by the plant. And now you have low water stress. And so if you're getting a flower drop, and that's very typical in peppers, in net houses as the summer season comes. And that's because the climate inside changed all of a sudden. And so we were doing trials specifically to understand, could we prevent the flower drop? Could we prevent the soft fruit? And the answer was yes. By putting a cooling roof above the insect net, we were able to regulate the sunlight before it got to the insect net. And what that did was the cooling roof lowered the transpiration rate, so the humidity didn't skyrocket inside the house. And that lowered the water stress, and by lowering the water stress, the plant didn't abort. And that was part of that fruit test that I alluded to earlier with the yellow Estefania, yellow capsicum. We had, I think it was 30 or 40% thicker wall structure and a 40% longer shelf life, simply because of the change in the structure of the pepper, which was due strictly to being able to regulate the sunlight above the insect net. So this is why you'll see every time we start with a physiological problem, we're trying to go back to figure out what's the root cause climatically. And then we want to change the climate to prevent the problem from happening in the first place.
I have a question here, Richard. This grower is in a climate that's dry year round and very windy. And he's wondering how we would manage the retractable roof in terms of pests, two dust, spider mite, and sucking pests.
Can you just repeat that one more? I just want to make sure I got it.
In my area, the climate's in summer and winter is dry. It's also very windy. So the impacts is really affecting his two dust, spider mite, and sucking pests. How can we manage under a retractable roof?
Well, I think to start off with, we'd probably recommend that you have insect net underneath the retractable roof, because if you're hot, dry, and windy, you're in a very high transpiration environment. And because you're dealing in sucking insects, if you can prevent the entry, that's a positive. So if you started off with a layer of insect net, now that gave you the net house environment, so you had insect exclusion, you reduced the impact of the wind, and you started to trap the humidity that was being lost by the crop. And now you put a retractable cooling roof over top of the insect net. And now what we're doing is we're regulating the climate above the insect net. So we will control how much infrared and UV radiation is coming inside. we will control the rate of air exchange through the insect net using the roof. And so we now have the ability to regulate the transpiration rate. And we could add a low pressure misting system, where if we wanted to be able to drop the air temperature, we could do that simply by operating a low pressure misting system on an intermittent basis. So, and that would not use a lot of water, because you would not be actually turning on the misting until, say, the temperature is above 30 or 32 degrees and the relative humidity dropped below, say, 50%. So you may only be running the misting from, say, 11 or 11:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the temperatures are above 32, 33 degrees. And now you've solved the problem of the insects and the climate problems with just a layer of insect net with a retractable roof over top. And they said they're in a dry climate, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then they can use the lowest cost house, which is the flat roof, because we don't need to manage the rain. And that's basically the house of choice for the Middle East right now.
Richard, there is a very good question from my anonymous friend, that how to understand that plant are transpiring excess or below the required level.
How to know if they're transpiring too much or not enough?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is look at the plant. So if you want to understand if the plant has been transpiring too much or too little over a long period of time, look at the structure of the plant. If you have long internodes, you know the plant is transpiring little amount of water, because the moment the plant stretches, it's telling you right there that the transpiration rate's low. And if the internodes are really short, it's telling you that the transpiration rate's high. So the first thing to do is look at the plant structure and go, do I have an elongated stem or not? Or am I in the optimal internode length? If I want to know at a moment's notice if it's transpiring too much or not enough, first of all, obviously look at the leaves. Are the leaves staying flat like they are in the morning, or did they start to curl? Because the moment the leaves start to curl, the plant's telling you that it's run out of water. The moment the growing tip started to fall, it told you it ran out of water. So while we cannot measure transpiration, we can see physical signs of the plant that it's transpiring too much. So look at the plant. I keep on saying that. Don't look at the climate first, look at the plant first. And you will be able to tell if the plant is transpiring too much or not enough by the structure, and then by the response. Any flagging, leaves falling down, leaves cupping, growing shoots falling down, they're all signs that told you that the transpiration rate was too high. And now you have to figure out how you're going to reduce the transpiration rate so that the plant doesn't demonstrate those symptoms. So what we do is we look at the plant, become an expert at looking at plants closely and trying to understand if they're developing according to a low water stress or a high water stress environment. Other questions? I think we've got time, because we said 2 hours plus some questions, so we're coming up on 2.5 hours now. So is there one more question that we want to jump on? I think there's one question here: how to overcome blossom end rot on sunny days with more than 38-degree temperatures in sweet peppers in a polyhouse with hot and humid conditions. Well, if you have a polyhouse, you cannot increase the transpiration rate. So if you have blossom end rot in a polyhouse, you have low transpiration. And the best way to increase the transpiration is to increase the amount of infrared radiation and to increase the wind and to reduce the relative humidity. So if you have blossom end rot in a polyhouse, what that's telling you is the polyhouse climate is causing a low transpiration rate, and the symptom is blossom end rot. So you can try to spray and do all this stuff to try to compensate for it, but you're not going to prevent the problem until you can change the transpiration rate. And just remember, infrared radiation, air temperature, wind, and relative humidity together are all working in combination to influence the transpiration rate. So blossom end rot is a nutritional problem that's typically caused by too low of a transpiration or too high. And that's the problem with the polyhouse environment, is you cannot create a normal transpiration rate that a plant is used to working. It's at the same, the impact is exactly the same. If I had a blocked artery, my blood is not flowing at this normal rate, and it will cause negative side effects with my body. And I can take all the supplements I want, but until I fix that blocked artery, my body will not be performing at normal. And that's the same as a plant. If it's not transpiring normal amounts of water, you're going to be dealing with all of the consequences from a low transpiration rate. And that's why farming is so complicated, because in a polyhouse, you cannot change the transpiration rate and make it normal. It's always going to be low compared to what happens in the natural outdoors. So the more time we can get the plant back outside, the more we normalize the transpiration rate, so all of the other plant functions will behave like normal. So with that, I think we'll draw this to a close. I appreciate everyone joining us, and the panel for also joining and contributing their experiences. And we'll think about how to create the next webinar to share more experiences. So thank everyone for joining, and have a great day. Bye now.